Today I want to talk about language tests. How important are they? Do I take language tests? What impact do they have on our learning? It might be a little controversial, but to me, the fundamental fact of language learning is that it's a fuzzy process. As language learners, we have to be willing to accept uncertainty. For a long, long time, the language is unclear to us. There are always moments when we forget words that we we have in our memory somewhere, but can't produce. We can't recall them. And the whole process itself, I believe in input-based learning. I believe in the power of reading and listening. And yet, whatever I'm doing in the language, I have no idea what is sticking. Even if we study a table of, declensions, grammatical rules, or lists of words, whatever we're doing with the language, we have no idea to what extent are we learning. It's a fuzzy process. It's not only fuzzy, but it's an error-driven process. In other words, we need to make mistakes in order for the brain to get used to the language. And so, to some extent, if we focus on tests and test results, we may be discouraging ourselves from venturing out in the language, discouraging ourselves from making mistakes. It's even true that we may get something right one time and get it wrong the next time, or get it wrong on a test when we actually knew it. There's so much fuzziness surrounding this whole issue of language acquisition. I liken it a bit to setting up a new computer when you have this sort of finger touch ID on your keyboard, and you have to continue touching that key with your finger so that the computer can identify your fingerprint, so that you then have something that's unique to yourself that you can use as a password on the computer. You watch this thing. I have no idea how it works, but I know I have to keep on touching that key in order for that fingerprint to be registered. And language learning is the same. We have to stay active, and gradually the fuzziness will dissipate and things become clearer and clearer by a process that we don't fully understand. It is sometimes said that we overestimate short-term progress and underestimate long-term progress. For example, electrical vehicles, for the longest time people talk about them, it's going to happen right away. It doesn't happen right away, but eventually it happens big time. And I've seen this in business. A new product, we think it's going to do very well. It doesn't do very well at first, but eventually it does. The same with language learning. We are listening, we don't understand, we think we're not learning anything, and maybe in the short term we're forgetting lots, but we don't know the impact of our engagement with content, speaking with people, and making mistakes, what impact that has on our longer term acquisition of the language. It's all fuzzy. So that makes me wary of the value of tests, which try to take a snapshot of where you are in the language, where you, in fact, may have accumulated a lot of potential capability in the language, which is not showing up in the test. Somewhat related to this idea of tests is when people ask me, how long does it take to learn a language? How many words do I need to know in order to become fluent? How long does it take to stop thinking in your native language when you're learning another language? These things are all very gradual, very fuzzy. There's no hard and fast rule, and therefore, if there are no hard and fast rule on what is required to be effective in a language, then by the same token, it's very difficult to meaningfully test someone in a language. Yet it's common. Just the other day, I was checking out an app that the Canadian government puts out called Moril for learning French and English. And on their landing page, they ask you to test yourself to see what your level is. I would never do that. I'm either a complete beginner or I'm somewhere on the way to becoming better. And I like to search for content of interest and explore the language. It doesn't matter to me where I am. And many apps, Duolingo was like this when I tried it, they force you to pass a certain test before you can go to the next level, which I don't know if that's still the case, but also I don't like those kinds of restrictions. I just like to explore. And I don't really believe that those tests are that accurate. In fact, it was my experience before. I've met people who had high scores in TOEFL and didn't communicate very well in English at all. And TOEIC, which is cheaper than TOEFL, I felt to be good enough because it's less expensive and faster. And along those same lines, apparently Duolingo now has an English test that you can take, which is accepted by some schools, and it's inexpensive and takes an hour or two to do, and therefore I think it's better. So cheaper, faster is better, because I'm very skeptical of the value of those tests in terms of being any kind of an objective measurement of a level in a language. However, there are negative aspects to tests. It encourages people to be reluctant to make mistakes. I've spoken to people here in Vancouver who say, gee, Steve, I would love to learn languages, Spanish, but I'm very bad at languages. I couldn't learn French. I did poorly at school. And so they have negative sort of memories of language learning based on making mistakes. And yet making mistakes is exactly what's needed in order to improve in the language, assuming that you enjoyed the process. because language learning is all about your attitude, your level of enjoyment, your interest, your curiosity, your confidence that you'll get there eventually, all of which influence the time that you put in. And if you have a positive attitude and you put in the time, you will learn. So if the purpose of the test is to help you learn the language, I don't think it does that. If the test is there because it's required by an employer or by a school, well, of course, that's a different situation. And there I would go for the least expensive one available. And however well you speak a language, you're still going to have moments where you don't understand. For example, I mentioned that Canadian language learning app. On their landing page, they have a person speaking very quickly in French. It's from Quebec. And I think that a large number of people who are quite proficient in French would have trouble understanding what she's saying because they're not familiar with the context. They haven't heard that form of French before. Any number of reasons that make it difficult to understand. And I've had the same situation where you think you're good at a language, all of a sudden you're put in a situation that you're unfamiliar with and you won't understand. So there's so many ways in which it's so hard to nail down what a level is in a language, and yet very often it can trigger sort of a negative reaction. And from that point of view, I think tests, if they're not necessary, are best avoided. So as I always say, find ways to enjoy the process, find ways to enjoy the language. If you enjoy tests, by all means, take them. But if you don't enjoy tests, I would steer clear of them. I've only taken tests in 2 of the languages that I have learned, and yet I have been able to use those languages either in the country where the language is spoken or with other people in very meaningful ways, whether listening to podcasts in Persian or in French or Swedish, or where my levels are, different. I enjoy the languages, and that keeps me going. And that would be my advice to you. If you don't need tests, don't take them. But the key is enjoyment. Enjoyment is the driver of language learning. Thank you for listening. Bye for now.